Grace Nolan had been counting coins in her head for the last 15 miles. Gas, rent, Lily's inhalers, lunchbox apples. The math kept looping like a broken song, and every time the chorus hit, it sounded like not enough. The gas light had flickered on 10 minutes ago. Her old Toyota coughed when the road tilted and the wind slid through a crack in the window she couldn't afford to fix. October had put a thin skin of cold over the city, the kind that made the air smell like rain and wet leaves. She rolled the window lower and let it sting her cheeks awake. 1 more mile. 2. If she could just... Orange tore the night. It wasn't a glow, it wasn't a flicker from somebody's backyard fire pit, it was a living thing, flames clawing up the black like hands. Grace lifted off the accelerator before her brain caught up. The road widened around a gated drive with ironwork that curled like thorns. Beyond it, a mansion burned. She should keep driving. She should call 911, pull over, wait for the sirens, do what the handbook said. A sound ripped out of the fire and knifed straight through her. A child's scream. Her hands turned the wheel hard. The Toyota bounced over a lip in the asphalt and shot through the open gates. Gravel spat from under the tires. The driveway circled a fountain, statues already glowing red from reflected heat. No cars, no people, no blue strobe in the distance. Just the roar. Grace slammed the transmission into park and ran, heat hit like a fist. Her scrubs were already damp from a 12-hour shift in St. Anne's ER. Now the damp turned into steam. She yanked off her cardigan, soaked it at the fountain with shaking hands, pressed it over her mouth and nose, and sprinted for the open door. Smoke poured out in thick gray sheets. Inside, a chandelier threw shards of firelight across a hall lined with paintings. Curtains flamed like flags. Somewhere above, a child sobbed. "Keep calling," Grace shouted, voice shredded by the heat. "Don't stop, sweetheart. Keep calling." The cry quavered, left, then further down, then up. The central staircase rose like a white marble cliff already spider-webbed with cracks. The banister, a lacquered river starting to blister. Grace took the steps 2 at a time. Every breath burned. Her eyes watered so hard the world went smear-soft. At the top, a corridor bellowed flames out of room after room. She crouched to pull thinner air into her lungs and followed the sound to the end door. The handle scalded her palm through the cardigan. The paneling pulsed with heat. She braced her shoulder and drove herself into it. Wood splintered. The door burst inward and the room turned to noise. The bed was on fire. Drapes were on fire. A little boy was in the corner, arms around his knees, face streaked black, eyes too white. "I've got you," Grace said, and her voice came out like a rasp. "Close your eyes. Arms up. We're going now." He leaped into her, light with the boniness of 8 or 9, fingers digging into her neck. She wrapped him in the wet cardigan, turned her face away from the worst of the heat, and ran. The ceiling groaned. A line of fire licked across it with a sound like tearing cloth. She hit the hall, sprinted for the stairs, and watched the first 3 marble treads shear and slide, collapsing into a tilt of rubble. No time. No math. No plan. Grace grabbed the boy tighter, set her foot on the remaining edge, and jumped. The world became fall and impact and pain. She twisted midair, taking the hit with her shoulder and back, keeping the boy inside her arms like a secret. The floor slammed her breath away. For a second, she didn't know where up was. Then smoke shoved itself into her throat again, and she crawled. She didn't remember the doorway. She didn't remember the step-down or the sweep of cold night air. One blink she was in heat. The next she was on grass, the mansion, a scream behind her. The boy coughed and cried and clung. Grace rolled onto her side, body shaking, and pulled him against her so he could feel something solid. "You're okay," she told him, though the edges of her vision were going dark. "You're okay. You're okay." Headlights punched across the lawn. Tires bit into gravel. Doors slammed in a chorus. Men sprinted toward them. One voice came like a gunshot. "Adrian!" Hands reached for the boy. Grace tightened her grip before she even realized she was doing it. "Easy," another voice said. Older, cooler. "He's with her." The boy's arms loosened when he heard the first voice again, softer now, frantic with relief. "I've got you, mi pequeño. I've got you." Grace looked up. A man knelt in the grass, suit black as soot, hair pushed back from a face carved in worry. He gathered the boy, Adrian, into his arms with a tenderness that did not match the dangerous lines of his jaw. The man's eyes cut to Grace. They were dark, steady, and absolutely sharp. For one strange second, recognition shivered through her. Not of his name, his face, his reputation. of something older and simpler, the way a father looks when the world stops ending. Then the darkness closed completely and took her down. She woke to silk under her palms and oxygen in her nose. A ceiling coffered with pale wood hovered over her. A doctor with silver hair, a real coat, real stethoscope, clicked a penlight across her pupils. "You're safe," he said in a mild Italian accent. "Breathe slow for me." Grace obeyed because her lungs were sandpaper and obedience hurt less. The room came into focus, crown molding, oil paintings, heavy furniture that said old money without trying. Beyond the windows, dawn bruised the sky, orange and pink. "This isn't St. Anne's," she croaked. "No," the doctor agreed. "The Valente estate." The name clicked a door in her head. Headlines. Fundraisers with whispered warnings. A last name you didn't say lightly. "The boy?" she asked, forcing herself up on one elbow. Pain flared in her shoulder. "Adrian will recover," the doctor said. "Minor burns, smoke irritation. You saved him." Relief made her eyes sting. Then panic knocked the relief flat. "What time is it?" 7. Grace's guts went ice. Lily. The babysitter would be worried. The thought of her little girl waking and finding her bed empty with no morning kiss, no note. "I have to go." She swung her legs off the bed. The floor chilled her bare feet. She looked down and realized she wasn't in scrubs anymore, but a cream silk nightdress that looked like it had a comma in the price. Heat rushed up her neck. Someone had undressed her. Someone had. "I need my clothes," she said, lifting the sheet. "I wouldn't recommend leaving yet," the doctor said. "Mr. Valente." The door opened. The doctor stopped speaking and stepped aside. Marco Valente didn't fill the doorway, he darkened it. The tuxedo from the night, the black suit, was gone. In its place, a charcoal suit clean as a blade. The face was the same, controlled, slightly shadowed with lack of sleep, features too attractive to be comforting. He carried himself the way rich men who'd learned very young that people moved when you looked at them carried themselves. "Leave us," he said to the doctor without raising his voice. The doctor packed his bag and went. The click of the door lock afterward was soft enough to be polite. Grace drew the sheet a fraction higher. It was ridiculous. The nightdress covered more of her than her scrubs ever did. But modesty had nothing to do with cloth. "You're awake," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. Dark velvet dragged over stone. "Good." "I need to call my daughter," Grace said. Marco didn't move. "Lily," he said. 6 years old. Asthma. First grade at Westlake. The babysitter is Mrs. Tran. I sent security to verify. She's been paid for the extra hours. Cold spread through Grace's chest, different from the fires. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about you." "You had no right." Her voice came out steady. She felt a little proud of that. "I had every right," he said, and showed her his teeth, which wasn't a smile. "You carried my son out of a burning house. That makes you either a miracle or a threat. I don't like miracles." "I'm a nurse," Grace said. "I heard a kid screaming." Most people would have called 911 and stayed outside. Then most people should reconsider their priorities. Something like surprise flickered in his eyes and was gone. He stepped closer, stopping at the bottom edge of the bed like there was some line he wouldn't cross. "The fire wasn't an accident," he said. "The arsonist knew our cameras, our guard rotations, the way the locks work, which means they had inside help, which means when a stranger appears at the exact right minute to play savior, I ask why." Grace stared at him. "Do you think I set your house on fire and then ran into it?" "I think coincidence is a story we tell ourselves to avoid admitting someone planned our pain." His gaze didn't blink. "You're a problem, Ms. Nolan, whether you meant to be or not. I'm keeping you until I understand which. That's kidnapping. That's keeping you alive." He turned his head slightly. "There are people who want my son dead, people who will want you dead if they think you saw something. Consider this." He gestured delicately at the room, the view, the safety, witness protection with better sheets. Grace felt steady because if she didn't, she'd shatter. "I don't agree. I didn't ask you to." He reached for the door, then paused. "You may call your daughter supervised. You will not tell her where you are. You will not attempt to call the police. There are rules in my house. Break them, and you don't want to know the consequences." His eyes held hers for a second more, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected: exhaustion. Not of the body, of the spirit. Then he went out and the lock fell home. Grace didn't scream. What would be the point? She stood. Her shoulder hated that. The nightdress whispered as she crossed the room to the windows. The handle didn't turn. Triple locks. The glass was the kind that didn't break when a baseball hit it because the people who owned the house had more dangerous enemies than baseball. She breathed until the urge to fling every expensive object in the room at the door passed. Then she did what she always did at the edge of panic. Made a list. Call Lily, eat, drink water, assess injuries, ask for supplies. Learn the floor plan, count the steps from bed to bathroom, count the seconds it took the guard to unlock the door. Count the turns in the hallway when they walked her to the terrace later. Every number was a small island. She hopped from one to the next until the flood receded. Breakfast arrived with a young maid whose eyes slid to the bandages on Grace's hands and softened. I can leave the phone for 10 minutes. The girl whispered when she set down the tray. Please, don't get me fired. Grace could have hugged her. She dialed by muscle memory. Lily picked up on the second ring, voice sleep rough and sweet. Mommy? Hi, Bug, Grace said, and had to swallow. Mrs. Tran told you I'm helping at the hospital a little longer. You didn't kiss my forehead. I know, I'm sorry. Can you be brave for me? I'll be home soon. She felt Marco in the doorframe before she saw him, an expensive anchor holding up the room. She turned her shoulder so Lily wouldn't hear the room's echo. I love you to the moon. Past it, Lily said solemnly. Come home after dinner. I will if I can, Grace said, hating the wiggle of the words. She ate because she needed the sugar more than she needed dignity. Eggs, fruit that tasted like it had been flown in that morning, coffee better than anything in the hospital break room. She cleaned and redressed her burns when a tray of supplies appeared. Neat and efficient, everything she requested arrived with that same efficiency. Vitamin drink, a soft cardigan that wasn't silk this time, a pair of shoes that actually fit. It would have been easy to mistake captivity for care. In the afternoon, the door clicked and the boy she'd carried down the stairs slipped in around a guard's thick arm. Hi, he said, like they were in a hallway at school. He held up a page torn from a sketchbook, a stick figure picture, 3 shapes with labels in a careful block hand. Dad, me, Grace. He'd given her hair a halo of brown scribbles. On the stick Dad, he'd drawn a big square jaw. Hi, Adrian, she said, her voice softened without her permission. How are your lungs? They feel like when I run long at soccer, he said. Papa says I can only walk for 3 days. His mouth twisted with the injustice of it. Did you really jump the stairs? Kind of fell with style, Grace said. Can I keep this? It's for you, he said. So you won't forget us. The guard cleared his throat. 5 minutes, Mr. Adrian. Adrian's eyes darted to the man, then back to her. He leaned in with conspirator intensity. There are secret doors in this house, he whispered. Grace smiled. Sounds like a place built for adventures. It's built for hiding, he said so softly she almost didn't hear it. That night Marco came himself with the phone. He stood by the window while she called Lily. He looked out at the darkness like it could lie to him if he didn't keep watching. Thank you, Grace said after she hung up. Don't thank me, he said. Thank him. His jaw moved like he had words stuck in it. Adrian asked. Days slid into a rhythm because human bodies make rhythms out of anything. Grace walked in the garden with a guard at her shoulder. She learned the path that circled the fountain took exactly 3 minutes and 20 seconds at her pace. She learned which camera blinked a millisecond behind the rest. She learned where the wall was lower. She learned that none of it mattered because there were always 3 men between her and the gate. On the 4th morning, Marco asked her to walk. They went out by a side door. The garden smelled like rosemary and damp stone. Guards were posted at the corners like chess pieces. Grace breathed anyway. Green was green, even with eyes on it. My wife died in a fire, he said without preamble, 7 years ago. Grace didn't look at him. She looked at a rose, the color of blood diluted with milk. I'm sorry. I was in my office downstairs. His voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. The flatness was worse. She called my name once, twice. I went to the stairs. They were gone. Grace imagined that moment and nearly doubled over. The shape of the choice you can't make. The way time thickens into glue and you can't pull your feet through it. I froze, he said. People like to think they know what they'll do in the worst second of their life. I know. I did nothing. You breathed, Grace said. You lived. So Adrian had a father. I have replayed those 30 seconds every night since, he said. I changed the ending. I don't think. But the truth stays the truth. They stopped by a fountain with a bronze boy pouring water from an urn. Grace watched sunlight fracture on the ripples. Do you think I'm a monster? He asked finally, and the way he asked told her he already knew his own answer. I think you lock people in rooms, Grace said. And I think you tell yourself that makes you a protector. Maybe sometimes it does. Something that might have been a smile ghosted his mouth. You don't scare easily. I just don't believe fear is the only useful feeling. She looked at him. I ran because a child screamed. Not because of you. Not because of this place. Because that's what my body does. He studied her with that still predator attention. There are not many people like you left. I think there are, she said. They don't end up in houses like this often. A sliver of a day later, the world tilted. Marco's second, Rico, knife-thin and polite like a scalpel, brought a tablet into the breakfast room while Grace was teaching Adrian to cut pancakes with one hand so his sore arm could rest. He murmured in Italian. Marco's face shut down in increments. He turned the screen toward Grace. The article used a photo taken from a camera aimed at the service entrance. A figure in scrubs ran through darkness cut white by security lights. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. The headline ran like a siren. Nurse sought in Valente Mansion arson. Keep reading, Marco said. At the bottom, a paragraph in smaller font. Authorities recovered an identification badge near the ignition point. The name on the badge, Grace Nolan. Grace's throat closed. No, she said. It came out too soft. She said it again. Stronger. No. Rico tapped another image. Bank activity. A deposit. $50,000. Origin, untraceable offshore. I don't. She recognized the helplessness in her voice and hated it. Check the hospital logs. I clocked out at midnight. Ask security. Ask anyone. I was finishing notes. I had a 12-year-old with a broken nose and a grandmother with atrial flutter and a... She forced air in. I was there. We will check, Marco said, and now the cool had turned cold. It wasn't anger. It was ice forming over deep water. Her practiced calm tried to kick in. This is a crisis. Name the steps. But under the steps, fear beat like an animal in a cage, and the cage was her chest. Look at me, she said, hearing the plea and unable to pull it back. Please. Marco didn't. Rico did. His eyes were tired, like someone who'd watched too many people choose the wrong thing and learned not to be surprised. Convenient story, he murmured. Convenient rescue. Convenient money. Adrian stared between the adult's fork forgotten in a small hand. Papa? Marco never looked away from the tablet when he spoke. Take him to the library, he said, now. Grace's stomach flipped. Don't send him away. Don't, he's okay. He's... Now, Marco repeated softer. The softness was worse. The door closed on Adrian's confused face. The room shrank further. Grace felt the dizziness of running back into a room with no oxygen. I didn't do this, she said. Then who did? Rico asked. Anyone who hates you, she snapped, shock calcifying into anger. Someone who hired a professional crew to break your house. Someone who knows your systems and wants you to doubt the only people who... She bit the rest back. Who what? Marco asked. Finally he looked at her. The dark in his eyes didn't burn. It ate. Who might teach your son trust again, she said, and her voice shook. Who might teach you? He didn't flinch. That hurt more than a slap. Put her in the East Suite, he said to Rico. Guards on the door. Marco, do not say my name, he said, and there it was, the blade under the velvet. Not right now. They took her by the elbow. She didn't fight. She couldn't see a version where the fight ended anywhere except with her face on the floor. The East Suite was like the first room, only the windows faced the city farther away. The lock was new. She heard the weight of a new key settle into a pocket outside. She sat on the bed and stared at her bandaged hands until the edges of the bandages blurred. After a minute, an hour, a lifetime, she stood, went to the bathroom, washed her face, and breathed. The mirror showed a woman with smoke-scorched eyes, a smear of ash still at her hairline, and a line around her mouth that hadn't been there a month ago. She told herself the same thing she told panicking families in the ER. We're not at the end. We're at the messy middle. Messy middles feel like ends. When the knock came, she expected a guard with a tray. She got Adrian. He barreled in and threw himself against her waist. "Don't go," he said into her shirt. "Please don't go." The guard hovering in the door, a thick-necked man who could probably bench press the bed, looked like he wanted to apologize with his eyes and didn't know how. He closed them again. Grace held Adrian until his breath huffed normal. "I might have to, kiddo," she said, because she had promised herself a long time ago not to lie to children if she could help it. "But not because of you. Never because of you." "They said you hurt us," he said, eyes bright and angry. They say things all the time. They're usually wrong. Especially when they're scared." "Papa's scared?" Adrian asked like he'd never considered the premise. Grace smoothed his hair back. "He's been scared for 7 years, she said gently. "Sometimes scared people look like brave people. They're still scared." Marco came himself an hour later. He stood just inside the door like the threshold might bite him. "You'll be released," he said. "My driver will take you to a hotel and you can stay there until the police finish with you." "Finish what?" Grace asked. There was no spit in her mouth. Finishing believing a lie. He looked at her like a man looks at a cliff and calculates whether the jump will break both legs or only one. "Tell me you didn't take the money," he said finally. "Tell me." She stared at him, and a part of her that had made do for years with clearance rack shoes and instant ramen and sleep in 4-hour bites went very, very still. "No," she said. "Tell yourself." He shut his eyes. When he opened them, the edges had hardened. "I'll have your things brought down." She didn't have any things. The thought should have been funny. It wasn't. On the stairs, Adrian waited. He clung and cried angry. Grace knelt through the pain in her shoulder and hugged him like she could memorize the shape of his ribs through his shirt. "Be brave," she whispered into his hair. "And tell your papa the bravest thing isn't never trusting. It's trusting again anyway." Marco stood 3 steps up. Face a mask kings learned before they could read. He said nothing. She walked past him and out to the car without looking back because she had learned this the hard way. Turning around made leaving impossible. The gate shut behind her with a clean metal sound like a period. The hotel room smelled like lemon and soap and nothing. Grace took the envelope of cash the driver had set on the dresser and wanted to throw it out the window. She called Mrs. Tran and listened to Lily's day in a voice that made her feel like a stranger in a home she'd built. After, she sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap, and when the phone rang again, she almost didn't answer. "Miss Nolan," the voice said. Polite, precise. "Rico." "I don't like being wrong," he said. "Tonight, I hope I am." Grace let out the smallest laugh. "We agree on something. Listen." Paper rustled. 3 hours before the fire, a delivery van came through the service entrance. Shell Company plates, but it links to a man named Lorenzo Abe, bad history with the boss. 2 minutes after the van leaves, your hospital badge is used to ping the lock. "I was at work," Grace said. She could hear the burning back in her throat. "I can list everything I did from 9 to midnight." "We're pulling the footage," Rico said. "You'll be cleared." "That's not me being kind. That's me being accurate." "Why are you calling me?" she asked. "You could just fix it inside those walls." "I have my reasons," he said. His voice shifted, just enough for a human to peek out from under the soldier. "He's afraid," Rico said, "of everything he's already lost, and everything he can still lose. You're not the monster in this story, but fear makes all shadows look like monsters." "Are you asking me to forgive him already?" Grace asked. She didn't put heat on it. He didn't deserve the burn. "I'm asking you not to lock your door when he knocks with proof," Rico said. "If he's smart, he'll bring it himself." The line clicked dead. Grace stared at the blank screen and felt anger dissolve into something harder to hold. Hurt. It sat in her chest like cooled glass, clear, heavy, beautiful in a way that made your hands bleed. An hour later, a knock. She opened because she wasn't built to shut a door forever. Marco stood in the hall alone. He had the kind of tired you couldn't buy your way out of. "I brought you this," he said. He held out a folder thick with printed stills and stamped records. Hospital cameras, parking lot, clock in, clock out, the god who took the bribe. The offshore account that hit your bank first. His mouth twisted. I told the detectives the money was evidence planted to frame you. They're very willing to believe stories that make sense on paper. It's not paper to me, Grace said quietly. She took the stack. Her hand shook. It's my name. He nodded. His eyes didn't hide. I was wrong. Silence opened between them. Not cold, not warm. True. Adrian asked about you every hour he said into it. He thinks he did something. I told him he didn't. He's 8. He doesn't know how to put guilt down when he picks it up. I'll see him, Grace said before she could think. I'll explain like moms explain, and he'll believe me like kids believe. Relief flashed across Marco's face, honest as a sunrise. Tomorrow? Tonight, she said. But I won't come back to that cage. I know, he said. I'm trying to learn different doors. She looked at him then, not as a myth, not as a headline, not as the man who could crush a city block with a phone call, as a father built entirely out of fear and love. As a man who had taught himself not to trust because trusting had once left him with ash in his hands, as someone who had come anyway, alone, to her door. Then start with this one, Grace said, and stepped aside so he could enter with the evidence of her innocence and the possibility of something that might one day feel like a life. Marco hadn't expected her to open the door. He'd imagined her voice through the barrier cold, cutting, refusing him entrance. But when the latch turned, the sound was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. Grace stood framed by the cheap hotel hallway light, barefoot, hair undone, her face pale from exhaustion. She didn't ask him in. She just stepped aside. Marco entered, the air between them heavy with things unsaid. The wall smelled of cleaning chemicals and the hum of an ancient air conditioner filled the silence. The man who could command armies with a look now looked like someone trying to remember how to speak. I came to bring the evidence, he said, his tone even, but his eyes betrayed the night he hadn't slept. Grace crossed her arms, not defensive, simply holding herself together. I saw, she said quietly. You were wrong. He nodded once. I know. Knowing doesn't erase what you did, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse, empty. You accused me of burning your home. You let your people treat me like a criminal. You made me feel small. Marco's jaw tightened. You saved my son, he said, and I repaid you with suspicion. I don't ask forgiveness. I ask for a chance to fix it. Grace looked at him for a long time. You can't fix something you broke with fear, Marco. You can only build something new. Her words hit harder than anger, but before he could answer, her phone buzzed. The sound broke the spell. Grace frowned, picked it up. A message, no contact name, just a number. Her face went still. It's from your people, she said. Or someone who thinks they're yours. Marco stepped closer. What does it say? Grace read it out loud. If you care about the boy, don't trust Valente. He's next. She looked up, alarm flickering in her eyes. What the hell does that mean? He took the phone, scrolled, lips pressed tight. The number wasn't familiar, but the pattern was. Encrypted routing, same method Lorenzo's men used before. It means someone still inside is playing a dangerous game, he said. And Adrian might be the piece. Her stomach turned cold. We have to go. Marco looked at her sharply. We? Grace straightened. You can't go alone. If this is real, you'll need someone who doesn't belong to your world. Someone they don't expect. A muscle jumped in his jaw, but he didn't argue. He handed the phone back. Pack what you need. We leave now. They drove in silence. The city passed outside, neon bleeding into wet asphalt, sirens in the distance. Grace sat stiffly, arms crossed, watching the blur of streetlights. Marco kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gun at his side. The tension was a living thing between them. You shouldn't have come back for me, Grace said after a long stretch. It's dangerous. I don't do should, Marco said quietly. I do what has to be done. Grace glanced sideways at him. You mean control. I mean protection. Same thing in your world, isn't it? His hand tightened slightly. I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, she said. Neither is the truth. The words hung there. He didn't answer, but his silence wasn't defiance. It was something else, something close to respect. When they reached the estate, the gates opened without question. Guards straightened as the car rolled through. Grace noticed how each one avoided Marco's eyes, reverent but afraid. The air inside the grounds felt different, tense, thicker somehow. Rico met them at the door, his usually calm face hard. "Boss, we found something." He led them to the security room. Screens flickered, feeds from every corner of the property. One video froze on a frame. A maid, the same one who had brought Grace breakfast, slipping a small object under the garden bench. Grace's stomach dropped. "That's the fountain path." Marco zoomed in. The object glinted under infrared. A transmitter. Small, military grade. "She's one of Lorenzo's," Rico said grimly. "We just didn't see it." Marco's voice went low. "Where is she now?" Rico hesitated. "Gone. Took her bag, left 20 minutes before you arrived." Grace stared at the screen. "She knew when you'd be out." Marco exhaled sharply, fury barely leashed. "She had help." "Inside?" Grace asked. His silence was the answer. The night cracked open like glass. By the time alarms blared, Grace and Marco were already running. The West Wing lights went out first, then the East. Backup generators kicked in, painting everything in red emergency glow. Rico's voice came through Marco's earpiece. Movement outside the perimeter. 2 vans, 5 men each. Grace grabbed Adrian from his room. The boy clung to her neck, half asleep, terrified. Marco's men swarmed the hallways, guns drawn. Radios hissing. "Basement," Marco ordered. They descended marble steps to the lower level, a space Grace hadn't seen before, concrete walls, steel doors. Marco entered a code, opened a hidden chamber lined with monitors and weapons. He guided Grace and Adrian inside, locking it behind them. The child trembled. Grace knelt, cupped his face. "Look at me, Adrian. You're safe. Hear me? Safe." Marco moved to the screens. His men fought outside, flashes of light, muzzle bursts, chaos. The noise felt distant, muffled by layers of stone, but Grace's pulse beat in her ears. "This was planned," Marco muttered. "They knew where to hit." Grace rose, stood beside him. "Then someone told them." He nodded slowly. "Someone close." A loud thud rattled the far wall. Dust fell from the ceiling. Grace instinctively pulled Adrian behind her. Rico's voice again. "We're pushing them back, boss, but they're not here to kill. They're taking something." Marco's eyes snapped to the secondary screen, the server room feed. Figures in masks moved fast, plugging drives into terminals. "They're stealing my files." "What's in them?" Grace asked. "Everything," he said darkly. "Accounts, contacts, secrets the city pretends not to know." Another blast shook the compound. The lights flickered. Grace's voice cut through the chaos. "If they wanted you dead, they'd bomb the place, not break in. They're after leverage." Marco looked at her, realization dawning. "They're going to use this to destroy the Valente name publicly." "Then stop thinking like a king," she snapped. "Think like a father." His head turned sharply. "What?" "You said protection. Prove it. Get Adrian out." For a heartbeat, he looked ready to argue. Then he holstered his gun, knelt to Adrian. "We're leaving," he said. "Stay close to Grace." They moved through a service tunnel Grace hadn't noticed before. The air was thick with dust and gunpowder. Marco led with the precision of someone who'd memorized every inch of his kingdom. Behind them, Rico's voice. "They've got the files." Repeat. "They've got the drives." Marco stopped halfway up the tunnel. "Change of plan," he said. "Rico, destroy the remaining servers. Burn everything." "Boss, do it." Grace caught his arm. "You'll lose everything." "I already did," he said. "Now I keep what's left." They emerged into the garden under a bruised sky. Smoke drifted across the moonlight. Sirens in the distance. Police finally. Marco cursed softly. Too early. Grace frowned. Too early for what? He didn't answer. A shape moved in the shadows. Rico bleeding from his shoulder but still on his feet. "Drive's gone," Rico said, grimacing. "But I tagged one. GPS signal active for maybe an hour." "Can we trace it?" Grace asked. "Already working on it," Rico said. "But there's more. The police radio. They're calling this a rescue. Someone told them you kidnapped Grace Nolan." Grace froze. "What?" Marco's expression turned lethal. "Lorenzo set the stage perfectly. The fire, the frame up, now this. He wants to flip the story. Make me the monster." "He's not wrong about the monster part," Grace muttered. "But he's not winning." Marco looked at her, truly looked. and for the first time that night, something like respect passed between them. "You're not afraid anymore." "I'm too tired to be." He almost smiled. By dawn, the estate was sealed by police tape. Marco's lawyers worked in the background, his men silent shadows packing evidence away. Grace sat on the steps, Adrian asleep in her lap. For once, she wasn't thinking about escape, only about survival. Marco approached, coat over his arm. The early light turned him human. No armor, no title, just a man with blood on his sleeve and regret in his eyes. "They'll come after me next," he said. "FBI, Interpol, all of them. They'll think you're part of it unless you leave now." Grace shook her head. "If I leave, they'll say I ran. I'm staying until Adrian's safe." Marco looked down at her, the faintest curve at his mouth. "You really don't scare easily." "I work in an ER," she said. "You're not the worst night I've had." That earned an actual laugh. Quiet. Real. "Then we fight together," he said. By noon, the estate was crawling with uniforms and silence. Every word was being recorded, every gesture documented. Marco stood on the gravel path in front of what had once been his fortress, answering calm questions with an expression carved from stone. Grace watched him from the steps, the same way she'd watched trauma patients balance on the thin line between control and collapse. Rico came up quietly, a bandage at his neck. "We have the GPS trace," he murmured. "Signals active 30 miles east near the docks." Marco's gaze didn't move from the officer in front of him. "How long?" 40 minutes, maybe less. "If we wait for clearance, it's gone." He turned to Grace. "I'm going." Grace blinked. "You just told the FBI you'd cooperate." "I am cooperating," Marco said, "by cleaning up what they can't." Rico smirked under his breath. "The Bureau doesn't do docs. Too damp." Grace rose. "Then I'm coming with you." Marco shook his head. "You've done enough. I've done what any decent person would," she said, stepping down the stairs until they were eye to eye. "But this isn't about decency anymore. This is about the boy sleeping in that house who's going to wake up asking where his father went. If you get yourself killed, he loses everything again. You need someone who'll remind you what matters." Rico glanced between them and exhaled through his teeth. "She's not wrong, boss." Marco's jaw ticked. "You both make a habit of telling me that." The drive to the docks cut through the industrial belly of the city, warehouses, cranes, rust bleeding down walls. The sky had turned the color of old steel. Grace sat in the passenger seat, fingers tight around the strap of a medical bag Rico had thrown her. "For first aid," he'd said, but the weight inside told her there was more than gauze and bandages in it. "Tell me about him," she said after a few minutes. "Who?" Marco kept his eyes on the road. "Lorenzo, the man behind all this." Marco's hands tightened on the wheel. "We were partners once. My father trusted him. I did too. He handled logistics, finances, the quiet things no one talks about, until he started thinking the name Valente was a leash." Grace frowned. "And you cut it." "I should have," Marco said. "Instead, I gave him a way out. A new city, new accounts. I thought mercy would buy peace. And now he's cashing that mercy in blood." His mouth curved in a humorless line. "That's the trouble with mercy. People think it's weakness until it ends them." She watched his profile for a moment. The scars of power carved deep, the exhaustion around his eyes. "And what about you? When does it end you?" He didn't answer. The silence was enough. They reached the docks at sunset. The air smelled of oil and salt. Rico was already there, crouched behind a shipping container, watching through binoculars. "Warehouse 17, he said. "Heat signatures. 3 vans, maybe 10 men. One's Lorenzo." Marco crouched beside him, studying the layout. "No police?" Rico shook his head. "Not yet. We beat them here." Grace leaned forward. "You're not planning to walk in there shooting, are you?" Rico gave her a sideways look. "You got a better plan, Doc?" "Yeah. Don't die." Marco almost smiled. "Point taken." He looked at her bag. "You brought it?" She unzipped it. Inside were not only medical supplies, but a small radio transmitter and 2 pistols. She raised an eyebrow. "You people prepare for everything, don't you?" Rico grinned. "Occupational habit." Grace took a slow breath. "Then let me help. I'll go in first. They don't know me. They might lower their guard." Marco's gaze snapped to her. Absolutely not. Marco. He stepped closer, low voice a command. You think I'm letting you walk into a den of wolves because they might not bite you? No. You stay here. Grace stared at him, then laughed, sharp, tired, fearless. I ran into your burning mansion with nothing but a cardigan. You think I'm scared of men who hide behind guns? For a moment he didn't breathe. Then slowly his expression changed. Not approval, but recognition. You're impossible. Maybe that's what you need, she said softly. They moved in together, Grace in front carrying a medkit, Marco and Rico flanking behind through the shadows. The warehouse door was half open, the interior lit by yellow sodium lamps that made everything look jaundiced. Inside, Lorenzo stood near a table piled with hard drives and briefcases. He was older than Marco, softer around the edges, but his eyes glittered like broken glass. Ah, he said when he saw them. The prodigal returns. Give me the drives, Marco said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Lorenzo chuckled. You should thank me. I'm giving you an ending. Grace's gaze darted to the corner. Two men aiming weapons at them. Her pulse jumped. Marco. I see them, he murmured. She shifted, pretending to open her bag. Her fingers found the transmitter, thumbed it on. A faint light blinked once, then steady. Somewhere far away, a signal was sent. You burned my house, Marco said, stepping forward. You tried to kill my son. I cleaned the slate, Lorenzo said. You built an empire on secrets. I'm just setting them free. And what happens to the people in those secrets? Grace asked. The kids, the families, the ones who didn't choose any of this. Lorenzo looked at her like she was a curiosity. Collateral. The word lit something cold in Marco's eyes. Then so are you. He moved. The world erupted. Shots cracked. Grace dropped, hands over her head. Rico returned fire, metal screaming as bullets hit walls. Lorenzo lunged for the table, grabbing a drive. Marco tackled him, the two men crashing against crates. Grace crawled toward the nearest wounded man, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. Training, overtaking fear. Stay with me, she ordered, though he was the enemy. Stay. A hand grabbed her wrist, Lorenzo's voice close and desperate. He's worse than me, he hissed. You think you can save him? He'll destroy you like he destroys everyone. Grace met his eyes. Maybe. But at least I'll go down trying to save something worth saving. She drove her knee into his ribs hard. He gasped. Marco swung and the fight ended in one clean blow. Lorenzo hit the floor and didn't move. For a second the only sound was breathing. Heavy, ragged, human. Then Rico's radio crackled. Police inbound. 2 minutes. Marco turned to Grace. She was covered in dust and blood. Not hers, and shaking, but standing. You signaled them? She nodded. I figured you'd need witnesses. He looked at her, something like astonished laughter escaping him. You're insane. Maybe, but now they'll see who started this. Blue and red lights painted the docks moments later. Officers poured in. Marco raised his hands without resistance. Grace stood beside him, silent. Rico leaned in close before they were separated. They'll arrest him, he whispered. But this time, it's for the right reasons. Grace nodded. Her throat felt raw. Then, it's worth it. As they led Marco away, he looked over his shoulder. His eyes met hers. No words, just a promise, unspoken but understood. This isn't the end. 3 weeks later, the news called it the Valente collapse. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, chasing every headline about the Mafia king who surrendered himself. What they didn't print were the details that mattered. The children pulled from Lorenzo's trafficking routes, the hospital suddenly receiving anonymous donations, the evidence Grace quietly handed to investigators. She visited him once. The prison was gray and humming with fluorescent light. Marco sat on the other side of the glass, dressed in plain clothes that made him look smaller, but his presence hadn't faded. When he saw her, he smiled, a small tired curve. They tell me you saved lives again, he said. I did what I could, Grace replied. He studied her face. You're not wearing fear anymore. I learned it doesn't suit me. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable. Then she said, they're talking about early release, cooperation, testimony. You might walk out of here in a few years. He nodded. If I do, I'll owe you another apology. You already gave it, she said. With actions. His gaze softened. And you? Grace hesitated, then smiled faintly. I'm learning to build something new. Good, he said. Build it strong. A guard tapped the glass. Time. Grace rose. For a heartbeat, she wanted to reach through the barrier, but instead she placed her hand against it. He mirrored the gesture, a quiet echo of the night they'd stood in the firelight, strangers bound by something neither of them understood. When she left the prison, the sky was pale blue, the kind that looked freshly washed. She stood in the parking lot and breathed until the air no longer hurt. Back home, Adrian's letter waited in her mailbox, a messy drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands. Me, Papa, Grace, Lily. She smiled through the tears. Far away behind concrete and steel, Marco Valente sat in his cell, sunlight slanting through the bars. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth without flinching. And he smiled too. Because somewhere beyond all that ash, something had survived. Something fragile, stubborn, alive. The city hadn't been that quiet in years. After Lorenzo's death, silence wrapped around the streets like fog. Thick, deceptive, temporary. The kind of silence that comes before another storm. Grace had thought it was over. She'd testified, given statements, watched the man who destroyed everything finally fall, but peace was a luxury people like her never got to keep. She was walking out of St. Augustine's Hospital that morning when she saw it, her face on the giant screen above the pharmacy. Breaking news. Nurse suspected in Mafia conspiracy. Her heart stopped. The photo was one of her hospital ID pictures, the lighting harsh, her expression mid-blink, like a mugshot. The voiceover followed. Sources confirm that Grace Hale, the nurse linked to Mafia boss Marco DeLuca, is under federal investigation for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and aiding organized crime. She didn't hear the rest. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. The coffee slipped from her hand, splattering across the sidewalk like blood. Around her, people were already staring. Someone whispered, "That's her." Someone else raised their phone. She ran. Back at her apartment, Grace locked the door and turned off the lights. The TV kept talking in the background. Marco's arrest footage, his men being dragged out, flashing lights, chaos. They called it the DeLuca Fall. They called her the woman who helped him hide. Every channel told a different version of her story, and none of them were true. Her phone buzzed nonstop, texts from co-workers, from the hospital's HR, from reporters pretending to be friends. She threw it into the sink and turned on the tap. The screen flickered once and died. Her daughter, Ava, was sitting on the couch holding her stuffed rabbit wide-eyed. "Mom, what's happening?" Grace forced a smile she didn't feel. "It's just the news being stupid, baby. Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. In prison, Marco DeLuca wasn't sleeping. The cell was small, the light never turned off, and the walls hummed with the sound of cameras. He'd been through worse. Wars, betrayal, executions. But this silence felt different. It wasn't punishment, it was waiting. He'd expected federal interrogations, rival hits, maybe even death. What he didn't expect was the knock on the metal door at 2 a.m. "DeLuca," a guard's voice said. "You got mail." No one wrote to him. No one dared. He tore the envelope open. A single page. No signature. No name. Just 5 words, typed neatly in black ink. "They're coming for her next." His blood ran cold. Grace. He folded the letter, stared at it for a long time, and then burned it against the light fixture until the smoke curled like a secret. He knew that handwriting. It was Lorenzo's lieutenant, the one who'd escaped the raid. That bastard was still out there. Marco sat back on the cold bunk, jaw tight. They weren't coming for him. They were going after Grace, and he couldn't protect her from a cell. By morning, Grace's apartment was surrounded by flashing lights. The FBI came with warrants, flashlights, and a dozen cameras trailing behind. She didn't resist. She just stood there, clutching Ava's hand as they turned her life inside out. Her neighbors watched from their windows. Some whispered, some filmed. None helped. A man in a black suit read the charges like he was reciting a grocery list. "Grace Hale, you're under investigation for collusion, aiding a criminal organization, and falsifying medical records used to cover the escape of fugitives affiliated with Marco DeLuca." "I didn't," she started. He didn't look up. "Save it for court." Ava screamed as they handcuffed her mother. At the holding facility, the walls smelled of bleach and despair. Grace sat under fluorescent lights while agents leafed through her life. Bank statements, hospital shifts, every text she'd ever sent Marco. They asked the same questions again and again. When did you first meet him? How much money did he give you? Why did you hide him after the shooting? Did you know he ordered Lorenzo's death? I'm a nurse, she said quietly. He was bleeding out. I treated him. That's my job. One of them leaned forward, eyes cold. Your job doesn't include destroying evidence. They showed her photos. Marco holding her hand in the hospital. Marco standing outside her building at midnight. Marco walking Ava to school. The story wrote itself. The mafia boss and the nurse who fell in love and conspired to bring down his enemies. It was poetic, tragic, marketable, and completely false. By the time they released her, it was midnight. No charges, yet. Just further investigation. Grace drove home in silence. The radio was full of her name. She saw it on the newsstand, in hashtags, in whispered conversations at gas stations. Her world had become a headline. In his cell, Marco heard about it 2 days later. The guard smirked as he handed him a folded newspaper. Your girlfriend made the news again. Marco's eyes flicked to the headline. Nurse lover turns state witness. He crumpled it in one hand. If they were painting Grace as a traitor, that meant someone was feeding information to the press. Someone from inside his network. He closed his eyes. The list was short. Rico, Alvarez, Mateo. All men who'd sworn loyalty to him and all men with a price. That night, he made his first call. A single coded message through a corrupted channel. Find out who's pulling strings on Hale. Quietly. He didn't sleep. Grace couldn't work anymore. The hospital put her on administrative leave, which was just a polite way of saying, you're done. Her landlord gave her a week's notice. The police had concerns about safety. The grocery store clerk wouldn't look her in the eye. Parents at Ava's school whispered when she dropped her off. Everywhere she went, she saw judgment. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, bills spread like a deck of curses. The phone rang. Unknown number. She let it ring 3 times before answering. Grace Hale? Yes. A pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Tell your daughter not to go to school tomorrow. The line went dead. Her stomach dropped. She called the police. They told her it was probably a prank. But the next morning, when she opened the door, there was a dead crow on the doorstep. Its wings spread, a single bullet casing beside it. In prison, Marco waited. Then came the visitor. A guard opened the door to the glass booth. You got someone. It wasn't his lawyer. It wasn't his crew. It was a woman in a gray suit, sharp eyes, calm voice. Mr. DeLuca, she said. My name's Agent Whitmore. I'm with the Organized Crime Division. He leaned back, expression unreadable. FBI, huh? You here to offer me another deal? I'm here because your nurse is in danger. His jaw clenched. Grace. Whitmore nodded. Someone wants her dead. And not because of you. Because of what she knows. Marco's mind raced. What she knows? The files Lorenzo kept, Whitmore said. He had backups. Hospital data, account transfers, medical shipments, all under her clearance codes. Marco exhaled, realization dawning. He framed her as his cover. Whitmore nodded. And now the people who took over his operation want to erase every trail that leads to them, including her. Marco leaned forward, eyes dark as iron. You're telling me this because I can't protect her without you. He almost laughed. You want me to help the FBI? No, she said simply. I want you to help your conscience. She stood. Decide quickly, DeLuca. The people after her don't wait. When she left, Marco stared at the glass for a long time, the ghost of his reflection staring back. His life had been built on control, on cold precision. Now for the first time, he was trapped, watching the only person who still believed in him being hunted for crimes she didn't commit. Something in him snapped. He stood and pressed the intercom. Guard. The man looked up. I need to make a call. The prison phone booth was supposed to be soundproof. It wasn't, Marco whispered through the static line, voice low, calculated. Rico, listen carefully. Grace is being hunted. Whoever's left from Lorenzo's crew, take them down. Quiet. No witnesses. The voice on the other end hesitated. You're talking about a federal case, boss. You're inside now. We can't just do it. Marco interrupted. And make sure my name never comes up. Then he hung up. The guard pretended not to hear, but in a place like this, secrets were currency. Marco knew the information would leak by morning. He wanted it too. Let them know he was still pulling strings. By nightfall, Grace had packed everything that mattered. 2 bags, Ava's inhaler, the rabbit plush. She didn't wait for the next call. She didn't trust the police, the news, anyone. She drove until the city lights turned to darkness and the road bled into forest. The GPS had long stopped working when her headlights hit something, a car blocking the road. Black sedan, windows tinted. She slammed the brake. Ava jolted awake. Mom! Grace's pulse pounded. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. She knew that face. Rico. Marco's right hand, he raised his hand slowly, empty palms. Grace, it's me. What are you doing here? Keeping a promise, he said quietly. He sent me. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. He's in prison. Doesn't mean he's powerless. He took a step closer. Get Ava out of the car. Grace hesitated, then shook her head. If this is a trick, do I look like I'm here to hurt you? Rico's tone turned sharp. Look around, Grace. You're being followed. And then she saw it, headlights glinting far down the road. 2 cars, closing fast. Rico opened the passenger door. We don't have time. Move. Grace didn't think. She scooped up Ava and ran toward his car. Gunshots tore through the night. The windshield behind them shattered. Ava screamed. Grace covered her head and dove into the back seat. Rico peeled out, tires screeching, bullets slicing through air. The forest swallowed them in darkness. When they finally stopped, it was at an abandoned service station 20 miles outside the city. Grace's hands shook as she held Ava close. Rico lit a cigarette, staring at the horizon. They're not stopping, he said. Whoever took Lorenzo's place, he wants you gone before trial. Grace's voice trembled. Why me? I don't know anything. You do, Rico said. You just don't realize it. He tossed her a flash drive. This was hidden in Lorenzo's safe. Passwords your name backward. He'd been using your hospital credentials to move money and drugs through the medical supply chain. You were his clean face, his cover. Grace's stomach twisted. My God. Yeah, Rico muttered. And now that he's dead, his partners want every loose end burned, including you. She stared at the drive. And Marco. Rico exhaled smoke. He's tearing down what's left of them from inside. But the feds are moving too slow, so he told me to do what he can. Which is? Keep you alive. In the prison, chaos was brewing. Word spread that DeLuca had men still loyal on the outside. The guards got nervous. Transfers were discussed. Surveillance doubled. And Marco. He waited. He knew every pattern in this place. When the lights flickered, when the cameras looped, when the guards changed shift. He'd been counting down for days. When the moment came, it wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, calculated. At 2:07 a.m., the power failed. 2 minutes later, a laundry truck rolled out of the loading bay, its papers forged, its driver calm. Inside, hidden beneath a false floor, Marco DeLuca opened his eyes to freedom. By dawn, Rico's car had reached the safe house, a cabin half buried in pine, the kind of place no one would look for a nurse and her daughter. Grace tucked Ava into a makeshift bed. She turned to Rico. You can't keep running forever. I'm not running, he said. I'm buying time. Time for what? Before he could answer, the phone buzzed. Rico frowned. Unknown number. He answered. Yeah? A familiar voice crackled through. Put her on. Rico froze, then handed over the phone. It's him. Grace stared. Marco. His voice was calm, too calm. Are you safe? Her throat tightened. You broke out. I didn't have a choice. You'll go back to prison for this. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then Marco said softly, They sent men to your apartment. They burned your file, your ID, your savings. You don't exist anymore. Grace's voice cracked. Then what am I supposed to do? Start over. Where? Anywhere that isn't here. Tears welled in her eyes. You think it's that easy? No, he said quietly. But it's possible. A pause. Marco, why are you doing this? He didn't answer immediately. Then, Because I promised I'd protect you, even if it means you'll never see me again. That night, while Ava slept, Grace sat outside the cabin staring at the stars through the smoke of a dying fire. Rico was nearby, silent as always. She turned to him. Do you think he'll make it? Rico shrugged. He's Marco De Luca. He always makes it. She smiled faintly. You don't believe that? Rico crushed his cigarette. No, but I want to. Across the city, sirens wailed. A warehouse exploded in flames, the last of Lorenzo's men inside. Marco walked away, coat pulled tight against the wind. The fire lit his face in gold and ash. He didn't look back. Every step was heavier than the last. Every street he crossed pulled him farther from the life he might have had. But he'd made his peace with that. Some debts couldn't be paid with blood, only with silence. Weeks later, Grace received a letter. No return address, just a small envelope, edges singed like it had come through fire. Inside, a photograph of the ocean. A short note in Marco's handwriting. You once said the sea looked like peace. I hope you find it. M. Grace folded it slowly, pressed it to her chest. Behind her, Ava's laughter filled the air, chasing away the ghosts of gunfire. Rico leaned on the doorway, watching her. You could disappear, you know. I've got papers, new names. You and Ava could start somewhere. No one remembers any of this. Grace looked at him and shook her head. I don't want to disappear. I just want to live. Rico nodded once, then live. 6 months later, somewhere along the Amalfi coast, a fisherman saw a man step off a private boat at dawn. Tall, dark coat, scars hidden beneath his collar. He paid cash for a room, used no name, spoke to no one. Every morning, he walked to the cliffside and watched the sea, and every evening, a little girl's laughter drifted faintly from a radio nearby, the same laugh that once echoed through the Safehouse woods. He never smiled, but he stayed. When the papers finally printed the obituary for Marco De Luca, presumed dead, Grace clipped it, folded it neatly, and placed it in a box with the photo of the ocean. Some stories, she thought, weren't meant to end. They just learned how to breathe again. And as she watched Ava sleeping, sunlight filtering through the curtains, Grace whispered to the quiet air, Thank you for keeping your promise. Outside, the morning wind carried the faintest scent of salt and smoke, like the past, refusing to die, and hope, refusing to fade. The leaves had started to turn again, the way they always did in early October along the lake. Bronzes and burnished reds, a few bright yellow that looked like pieces of sun. On good days, the wind lifted them and let them dance. On better days, the air stayed still and they fell softly, one by one, like a promise kept. It had been a year since the fire, 6 months since the Elena Foundation opened its doors, 3 weeks since the judge signed the last papers that made it final. The state accepted Damien's cooperation, the government seized what needed seizing from Luciano Ferro's broken empire, and the city signed off on the new clinic permit without a single backroom whisper. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were hearings, hard questions, and faces that would always remember the old name before the new one. But there was a path, and for once it didn't lead into smoke. Clara had learned the new rhythm. Mornings at the foundation, white coat instead of scrubs, sneakers that didn't squeak on the polished floors, a lanyard that said director beside her name. Afternoons split between the therapy room and the little office with a view of the playground. Evenings at home with Mia and, more often than not, Leo and Damien too. Homework, cheap pasta, board games with bent corners, bedtime stories that ended with muffled laughter and the soft click of a door. There were nights the past still reached up and pulled. Mia's cough would sharpen at a change in weather, and Clara's heart would lurch the way it always had since the NICU. Leo would flinch at a kitchen timer he'd forgotten to expect, and firelight in a restaurant would make Damien look for exits he didn't need. But the edges of all of it had dulled, not erased, just gentled by repetition and time and 100 small ordinary mercies. The morning it happened was one of the still ones. The air carried that faint cold that meant the lake was serious, the kind that made people fold their arms without thinking as they walked. Clara had an 8:30 team meeting and a 9 o'clock intake with a new family whose little boy had been burned by a spilled pot of soup. She arrived early. She always did now. She liked taking the first lap through the building when it was quiet. The lights hummed. The coffee machine blinked awake. The playroom smelled like crayons and disinfectant and something sweet she could never quite name. She found him in the therapy garden, just past the glass wall where vines had started to take the trellis. Damien was standing at the far bench with 2 paper cups and a cardboard box that looked suspiciously like pastries from the place Leo declared had the best sugar on earth. He wore a charcoal sweater and a coat that didn't look like armor. His hair had grown a little longer. The scar at his temple had faded a shade. He looked like a man who had slept, and like a man who had decided to wake on purpose. "You're early," Clara said. "Traffic is merciful to reformed sinners," he said, and handed her a cup. "Vanilla latte, not too sweet, the way you pretend you don't like but finish anyway." "You're learning," she said, smiling. "I'm trying," he said. They sat. The garden had a 4-season plan. Dr. Russo's wife had helped with it. Mums in rust and wine sat low in the boxes, and a single sugar maple threw coins of red all over the path. The fountain in the corner did its quiet work. In another hour, the place would fill with noise and softness and the clatter of smaller lives. For now, it was theirs. "How's the budget?" he asked. "Honest," she said. "Leaner than you like, but real. The art therapy grant came through, and the volunteer program filled 3 slots. We'll make it to spring without begging the board for a miracle. Miracles should be reserved for surgery and stubborn children," he said. "I'm glad we don't have to use one on payroll." "You can't keep calling them miracles when it's just good planning," she said. "You give a steady yes and the city starts to believe you'll give another." "I'm not sure the city will ever believe anything entirely," he said, "but I'll take steady." He opened the pastry box. "I bribed the security desk to let me carry this upstairs without Leo intercepting it. He has a sense for sugar. He has a sense for joy," Damien said. "I'm trying to learn it." She watched his hands as he set a cinnamon roll onto a napkin and split it in clean halves. He still moved with that economy she'd noticed the first time she saw him in daylight, a man who counted breaths and exits, who catalogued a room and then set his back to glass so he could see. But he was different now. He didn't angle his body between her and every door. He didn't look for permission to laugh. "Do you remember," he said, "the first time we stood here?" "Yes," she said. "You told me I made the house feel less like a fortress. I told you I didn't know what to do with that." "I didn't know either," he said, rolling the napkin between his fingers. "But I know now." She waited. He took a breath and let it out slow. "I used to think redemption looked like a courtroom or a confession," he said. "A summit where you declare you're different now and the world agrees because you wrote it down. I thought it would be loud, big, cinematic. I thought maybe I'd deserve it if it hurt enough." "And?" she asked gently. "And it didn't look like that," he said. "It looked like the quiet. It looked like packing lunches at 6:30 in the morning and learning which socks Leo refuses to wear and remembering to put Mia's inhaler in the small pocket, not the big one. It looked like filling out grant forms until my eyes felt like sand. It looked like letting Rico run a meeting without me and trusting that nothing would burn. It looked like saying, 'I don't know,' and letting it stay." She could have told him she had arrived at the same truth from the other side, that she had expected forgiveness to be a single stroke, and found instead it was 100 small choices that only counted because she kept making them. That she had waited for the day she felt no fear, and discovered the day never came, and discovered she could still love while fear sat in the corner like a quiet guest. He slipped a small envelope across the bench between them. "What's that?" she asked. "2 things," he said. "One you expect, one you don't." Inside was a printed email from the Department of Justice. The formal language made something in her chest loosen and then sting. Notice of full compliance. Acceptance of cooperation plan, confirmation of immunity terms. It was the piece they'd been told was coming, delayed by exactly as much bureaucracy as Dr. Russo had predicted. "You're clear," she said. "All the way clear." "All the way," he said. "No shadows left I haven't named." "And the other?" she asked, fingers still on the page. He nodded at the folded paper that had fallen against her palm. She opened it and found a drawing in pencil and marker. 2 stick figures taller, 2 shorter. 4 names in a child's hand. Mia, Leo, Clara, Damien. The 4 of them held what looked like strings, the strings attached to something overhead. It took her a second to see it. Not balloons. Lanterns, little bright ovals clustered in a night sky. "They did it in art therapy yesterday," he said. "Ms. Helena asked the class to draw their home light, the light they trust to find even in the dark." Clara traced the letters of Mia's name. The M tilted forward. It always did. Leo had drawn himself with a cape and a scar. He always did that too. The paper felt like something fragile that had somehow survived a pocket full of coins. She looked up and found him watching her, the way he did when he had decided to say more and needed her to ask. "Tell me the rest," she said. "I went back to the house," he said. "The old one. Just once. I thought I would hate it. I thought it would take something from me again. It didn't, but I stood in the foyer and I could hear her voice, Elena, yelling at me to take the chicken out of the oven before I burned it. At exactly the same moment the smoke alarm started because I had already burned it." He smiled in that soft, lopsided way she loved. "I thought if I lit a match anywhere near that memory it would swallow me, but it didn't. It just warmed. I left a rose on the step and I walked away and nothing chased me. I think that was when I knew this isn't a truce with the past. It's a life." She slipped the drawing back into the envelope and covered his hand with hers. He turned his palm and threaded their fingers together. "Easy now. Come tonight," he said. "After clinic hours, the kids want to try the thing they saw in a movie. Paper lanterns on the lake path. Rico will grumble about fire codes and then produce permits from his pocket like a magician. Of course he will. We'll do it early, before the wind picks up, before anyone gets tired and the moment gets brittle. I'll bring extra jackets," she said. "And the cheap hot chocolate Mia swears is better than the expensive kind. Bring whatever feels like home," he said. "We'll make the rest." They did their work. The 9 o'clock family arrived, and Clara sat on the low chair with her hands open and explained how graphs worked in small words that honored the large fear in the room. The boy, Daniel, traced the dinosaur sticker on the table and asked if he would get a cape like Leo's. "Yes," she said, "it'll be imaginary, and it will be real, and it will be yours." She thought of the first time she had said we instead of I in a medical conversation, how it had surprised her throat and then softened everything inside it. She walked the therapy floor, stopped at the window where the toddlers painted leaves that looked like comets, checked charts, made the call about the vendor who was late with the burned sleeves. Damien had a meeting with the board about the satellite clinic on the south side. He texted her a picture of a whiteboard covered in arrows and then a picture of Rico pretending to be dead beneath it. She sent back a photo of a tray of Jell-O cups marching like soldiers. It was an ordinary day, and that felt like the bravest thing either of them had ever done. But the best part waited like a kept promise. They met at the lake after dusk, where the paved path slowed and the trees gathered like a whisper. The water held the last of the light, the way the inside of a seashell holds the sound of waves if you listen right. Leo and Mia wore knit hats with pom-poms that bobbed when they ran. Rico carried a tote bag that did indeed contain permits. Dr. Russo stood with a thermos and shook his head like a man who had spent his whole life telling people not to play with fire and had finally surrendered to the fact that sometimes they would, and sometimes the fire was gentle. They had 6 lanterns, 2 big, 4 small. White paper, thin as hope. Damien unfolded one and let it sway between his hands to show the kids how it would fill. The flame was a square of wax you lit and then trapped inside the air that wanted to lift. "Sky wishes," Mia said solemnly, as if she had invented them. "Sky wishes," Leo agreed and nudged Mia's shoulder with his own. They stood in a little crescent. Other walkers slowed and then moved on, reading the permission in the way Clara and Damien looked at their children. The night was kind. The wind had remembered to be elsewhere. "Okay," Clara said. "One for the clinic. One for Miss Helena's art room, one for Dr. Russo's new wing, one for every kid who learns to tell the story of their scars without flinching, one for all the parents who stop blaming themselves, and one for us," Mia said. "Us," Leo said. "Us," Clara said, and looked at Damien. He didn't look away. They lit the first wick together, the small flame catching, impatient, and then sure. The paper shivered and then rounded. The lantern tugged. Damien held and then let go, and the white oval rose slow, as if shocked to be trusted. It lifted into the space between branches and became a low star. "Go on," Rico muttered, pretending to be offended at his own softness. "Get out of here." The second lantern carried Dr. Russo's sigh and smile. The third carried Ms. Helena's laugh, even though she wasn't there to add it. The fourth was lighter than it should have been, and then steadied. The fifth rose so fast Leo yelped, and Clara told him that sometimes a wish is ready before you are. They saved the last for themselves. The kids insisted on it. Damien defers to no man in his world, but he had learned to defer to 8-year-old logic at least 50% of the time. What's your wish? Mia asked, peering up at the empty paper circle that would soon refuse to be held. Leo shrugged. I already live with Dad on weekends and we go to the foundation and I have a cape, he said. I guess I want more pancakes. World peace, Mia said, serious, and that Grammy's knee stops making that weather sound. Done, Damien said, like a man who would build a weather machine if asked nicely. Clara looked at the paper. She had always been wary of wishes, not because she didn't believe in them, but because she had learned the hard math of wanting. Every wish cost time, attention, breath. She'd spent too many years saving oxygen for other people to spend it easily on herself. I want quiet that lasts, she said finally. Not always. Just enough. Enough nights like this. I want to keep choosing this, Damien said. Every day. Even the days that look like before. Especially those. They lit the wick. The flame caught and tried to run and then remembered to sit. The lantern filled. Clara felt it tug at her hands and at something behind her ribs. They let it go together. It rose, slow and sure, and drifted toward the others. The lake held their small sky until the lanterns were far enough away to become part of the real one. A few people clapped the way strangers sometimes do when they are relieved by someone else's gentleness. Mia declared the hot chocolate acceptable. Leo asked if they could do it every night forever. Damien said yes, and Clara said we'll see, and they both meant the same thing. On the walk back to the car, the wind picked up and the leaves let go in earnest. They came down without sound, a soft curtain of rust and red. Clara held Mia's hand and felt the slight catch in her daughter's chest that always made her count. Inhale, exhale, fine. She looked up and saw a leaf land in Damien's hair. She reached reflexively to brush it away, and he caught her wrist and kissed the inside where the skin was thin and the old burns made a pale map. What? She asked, a little breathless for no good reason. I used to think endings had to be loud to be real, he said. I'm starting to think the good ones are quiet. This isn't an ending, she said. This is a middle with nice lighting. Then I reserve the right to make a scene someday, he said, smiling. You already did, she reminded him. In front of the entire city with a ring. He looked suddenly solemn, the way he did when he let himself feel the weight of joy. You could have said no. I could have, she said. But I didn't. He nodded, as if he was storing the words for later, the way he stored maps and recipes and Leo's sizes in his mind. They reached the car. The lanterns were gone from the lake, the sky doing its ordinary work without help. Later that week, she found a letter in her mailbox with no return, address and handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a photo, old and sun-worn, of Elena holding a baby in a park that might have been this one. Someone had scrawled a note on the back in a different hand. She would have liked you. Clara showed it to Damien without comment. He held it like it was an eggshell and then put it in a frame on the piano Leo insisted they keep, though none of them played anything more than Heart and Soul. It stayed there beside new pictures of 4 people who hadn't known 1 year could hold that much. The foundation grew the way good things grow, patient and stubborn. The Southside Clinic found its building, the art room's walls filled with drawings of capes and lanterns in hands. Dr. Russo taught a younger doctor to see like he did. Miss Helena made a kite festival happen with no budget because she'd spent her life making joy out of paper and string. Newspapers lost interest in the story that had once made them flush. That pot felt like mercy no one had asked for and everyone needed. There were fights, of course. Rich donors who wanted their names larger. A contractor who tried to shave a corner off a room size because no one would notice. A reporter who wrote a piece with an old photograph and a newer headline because that sold. Clara's body learned again what exhaustion felt like when it came from building rather than surviving. Damien's old allies called to test whether his changes were temporary. Rico stood in doorways with his arms crossed and asked for patience from men who never needed it. It wasn't easy. It was simply right. One evening in late November, when the lake had begun to form its first skin of ice and the city had lit trees in the plaza because it didn't know what else to do with the dark, Clara came home to find candles on her table and the cheap pasta Mia loved already boiling. Leo had set the plates crooked on purpose because he said straight lines were boring. Damien had a smudge of flour on his forearm and no idea. He looked up as if he'd been waiting for years. Dinner, he said. And after, if you're not too tired, a walk where the leaves are almost gone and the air tastes like snow. She took off her coat. She stood for a moment in the doorway, the way you sometimes do when you realize the sentence you're in isn't going to end the way you once feared. Mia barreled into her knees and Leo told her he'd beaten his math time by 30 seconds, and Rico appeared from the couch like a cat who had been pretending not to be there and asked whether anyone had considered adding garlic bread to the plan. She laughed, and the laugh felt like a thing that belonged to her. They ate. They did dishes badly. They bundled up. On the sidewalk, a neighbor Clara barely knew waved and said, "Pretty night." And it was, and they said yes, and it was enough. The leaves that were left made a sound like paper when they scraped against each other. Somewhere a kid practiced trumpet and missed the same note 3 times and then got it. At the corner, Damien stopped and turned her toward him. "You know the worst thing about fire?" he said. "What?" "It teaches you to run," he said. "That's not always wrong, but it gets into your bones. You start running even when the air is clean. You run from good things because you don't trust yourself to stand still." "And the best thing?" she asked. "It teaches you there's another way to move," he said. "Toward, into, with." "You're getting good at this," she said. "I have a good teacher," he said. 2 of them, if you count Leo's art instructor. "You should count her," Clara said. He kissed her, simple as breath. When they stepped back, a leaf twirled down and landed on her shoulder. He brushed it away with 2 fingers the way she had done with him at the lake. It felt like a circle closed without noise. At home, after the kids were asleep and the apartment held the soft sound of 2 different small breaths, Clara sat on the couch with the envelope that held the drawing of lanterns. She traced the names again. She thought about the part of the story people asked her to tell, the dramatic one with flames and sirens and headlines. She understood the appetite for it. She would always tell it when it helped. But the part she loved, the part she wanted to write down when no one asked, was this. A man who had been afraid choosing steady. A woman who had been brave choosing rest. 2 children who had learned to hear a past without being owned by it. 4 sets of hands letting go of paper lanterns because you cannot keep light by holding tighter. You keep it by setting it free and standing beneath it until your neck hurts from looking up. The heater clanked in the corner like a friendly ghost. She tucked the envelope back where it belonged and turned off the lamp. Through the window, the last leaf shivered and fell. The city kept its own promises in thousands of small ways. She believed it would again tomorrow. They were not finished. They would never be finished. There would be new fires, not literal ones, but the sort that test and temper. Some days would smell like smoke again, and some days would taste like rain, and most would be ordinary. That was the point. Clara went to bed. Damien shifted in sleep and reached for her without quite waking. She let his hand find her shoulder. In the other room, Mia coughed once, twice, and then settled. Leo turned over and sighed like a boy who had decided the world was safe enough to stop listening for danger. Beyond the windows, the wind took what was left of the leaves and laid them down gently on the path. In the morning, somebody would sweep them into piles. Children would run through them and scatter them again. That was how it worked. You gathered what you could. You set it in one place, the world rearranged it, and somehow it still made sense. On the clinic roof, the lantern hooks waited for the next small ceremony. In the files, the next intake form sat ready. In the drawer by the stove, a lighter and a note. You ran into fire. I ran out of darkness. We met here. DM. Years from now, someone would ask her how long it took to heal. She would say forever, and also not long at all. She would say it was slow, and then one day she noticed it had already happened in 100 tiny increments she'd been too busy living to measure. She would say it was like leaves. They turn. They fall. They feed the ground that feeds the tree that grows new ones. If you're lucky, you get to walk beneath them with somebody you love and somebody who is learning to love, and you get to hear them fall without thinking of burning. Tonight, it was enough to sleep. Tomorrow, it would be enough to wake, and in the space between, the quiet kept its promise.